Hey everyone, we're going to look at another Tony Miles game today. And this was played in the World Under-20 Championships in 1974. And according to Tony Miles, this is his most favourite game that he's ever played, due to the fact this clinched him the title in the World Under-20 Championships. But it's actually a really incredible game, and I'm still trying to get my head around it after analysing it for some time. In this game we're going to look at it from Tony Miles' perspective. He's playing black, and an Alexander Kochyev is playing white. Bear in mind these are the two very highly classed players, so this is going to be some very interesting chess, and don't despair if it's really difficult to get your head around it. There are very complex ideas in this game. So Kochyev played e4, Miles played the Sicilian with c5, knight to f3, d6, and white played d4, black takes, knight takes d4, and now knight to f6, hitting this pawn on e4. So white plays knight to c3, black plays g6, and bishop to e3 from white. Black plays bishop g7, and white plays f3. After knight c6, queen d2, we're into a Sicilian dragon variation, and black now castles, and white plays a very interesting move. They play g4. And Miles said that he actually have seen this move before by another strong English player, John Littlewood, played it against him, where he actually claims he got smashed up after playing the move knight to d7. And the game continued against John Littlewood. White played h4, black played knight d to e5, and white played bishop to e2. Black took on d4. After bishop takes d4, bishop to e6. He claims that white now has a very decisive advantage after playing the move f4, and the engines also tend to agree with this assessment. For instance, even if black plays knight takes g4 here, white can just take the bishop on g7. After king takes, just play f5, and black's in a lot of trouble. Mainly because this bishop hits this knight, and this pawn's hitting this bishop. So after this move, the main theory is now to actually play bishop to e6. But Miles had another idea. In the game he played e6, and his idea behind this is he's going to try and counteract this attack by attacking straight in the centre, which seems fairly logical. However, he wasn't expecting white's next move. Kochyev played knight b to d5, hitting this d6 pawn. Miles actually expected white to castle queenside, and he would have played d5. His main thinking behind this is because he thought that white can't actually play bishop to h6 in this position, just due to the fact that now black can take on d4, and if bishop captures on g7, black can actually play an intermezzo move, knight takes f3, and even if queen h6, black can take on g4, and will pick up the bishop on the next move. So after castling and playing d5, white has other options. White could also try knight takes c6, but again, after b takes c6, Miles wasn't worried. Even after bishop h6 in this position, Miles claimed that black's strong centre gives them the edge. Although the engines do tend to disagree with this assessment, it's very hard for white to actually break through black's position. After castles queenside and d5, h4 was also an option, but I think black can actually play knight takes d4, and after bishop takes d4, just try and simplify with d takes e4. White can try g5. And after black plays knight to h5, f takes e4, black can try and swap off with queen takes d4, queen takes, bishop takes, rook takes, and king g7. I think white is slightly better just due to the fact that black's going to have trouble developing this bishop on c8. But again, black is by no means lost in this position. But after e6, white didn't castle queenside, instead knight b d5 was played, and Miles played d5. White plays bishop to c5, and black didn't want to play rook e8 here. This is just due to the fact that knight d6 is rather nice, and after rook to e7, black is begging a bit here, and the rook on e7 doesn't look very natural there. But instead, after bishop c5, a6 was played, Exclam, as Ben Feingold would say, attacking the knight, and this is actually a very powerful move. In the game, white took on f8, and black has many options to take back here. Miles didn't actually like queen takes f8, but it's actually fine. Even after queen takes f8, Miles was worried about knight c7. But actually black can play d4 here. After knight takes the rook, black can play d takes c3. After b takes c3, play queen c5 with knight takes e4 ideas. So black is in the driving seat here. King takes f8 was played by Miles in the game, so black has just given up an exchange but is now hitting the knight on b5. So there are a variety of options that white can play here. Knight d4 is one option, but actually Miles would have played knight takes e4 in this position, and after f takes e4, hits the king with queen h4 check. If queen f2, he would have captured twice, and bishop takes d4. So black is still the exchange down, but black is definitely better in this position. Just due to the fact that maybe after king e1, let's say, black will play the powerful move knight to e5, hitting the pawn on g4 and also threatening moves like knight to f3. Bishop takes c3 is very much on the cards as well, but I think black wants to maintain the two bishops in this endgame. So after king f8, another move white could play is maybe knight to a3, but again Miles would have played a really powerful move. He would have played b5, preparing b4. White would have been forced to play knight to d1, and black would have played b4, forcing the knight back to b1, and black can simply play bishop b7 here, and white is in a grovelling position. Even though black's the exchange down, he's got very dynamic piece play and in a better position. But in the game, Kochyev didn't play any of these knight moves. He played e takes d5 first, and Miles took back e takes d5. So the knight is still very much attacked, so it drops back to knight to a3, and Miles plays b5, preparing move b4. So like in the previous variation, the knight drops back to d1, black plays b4, hitting the knight, and knight to b1. So as you can see, black is in a very dominant position already, and all this for the exchange for a bishop for a rook. But now Miles played a genius move. He played the powerful move bishop takes g4, and that was just an incredible move, to be honest. This is because if f takes g4, black can play knight to e4, hitting the queen. If queen g2, black can play queen h4 check. If king e2, black can now play knight to d4 check, and it looks as though black is going to mate white very soon. If king d3, queen e1, threatening knight c5 checkmate. Bishop e2 is the only move to block this, but still black can play knight c5. After king e3, they can play rook e8. After king f4, play bishop h6. g5 is the only move, but now black finishes up with queen h4 check. If queen g4, bishop takes g5 is checkmate. So after bishop takes g4, white definitely doesn't want to take with the pawn. Black's pieces just come into action straight away. Bishop e2 is another idea to defend the f3 pawn, but again black can play knight to e4. If f takes e4, black can play check, and if knight to f2, take on e2, and black's repairing bishop takes b2 to win more material. So after bishop takes g4, white actually played bishop g2. And I think the reason black's position is so powerful is because the pieces are ready to jump in at any moment. And also black still has this nice bishop hitting this b2 pawn. So after bishop g2, Miles played queen to e7 check, and Miles had everything covered. He thought if king f2 here, he could still play knight to e4 check. And if f takes e4, black can play queen h4. And if king f1, bishop takes d1, queen takes d1, queen f6, king g1, and play a move like bishop h6, threatening mate on e3. And of course the queen is also threatening to take on b2 if white defends. If king f2 as well, black could also opt for queen c5 check, which is actually what the engine move is. If king f1, play bishop to f5 and just maintain a solid position, which is the computer's choice. If knight to f2, play knight to h5, hitting the b2 pawn. If c3, play rook e8. If c takes b4, queen c4 check, king g1, and of course bishop takes b2, trying to lure this queen away from this protection of the e1 square. So queen e7 was a very powerful move, To be fair to White, he did play the best move on the board. He played queen to e3, blocking the check. But Miles now played the move that he seems to play all the time. He played knight to e4 once again. And again, White has two options. They can take the bishop or they can take the knight. If they opt to take the bishop, Black can start getting the pieces into the attack again with bishop to d4, hitting the queen. If the queen retreats back, Black can play rook e8. And if bishop takes e4, play queen h4 check. If king d2, rook takes e4. And Black's pieces are in optimum positions. Black is actually a rook down here, but it doesn't matter because White's undeveloped on the king side. So queen g2 and just queen g5. And White is really struggling for moves here. In fact, the only move on the board is knight to e3. And if bishop takes e3, then king d3. And Black will make White in a few moves. So in the game, White didn't take the bishop, they took the knight instead. F takes e4. Bishop takes d1 was played by Miles. If king takes d1, of course Black can take on b2 again, winning more material. So for this reason, White played knight to d2. So finally trying to unleash the rook on a1. But this allows Miles to take the pawn on c2. And of course White can't capture this d-pawn because the queen is pinning this queen. So White is in a struggling position. He played rook c1 at hitting the bishop. Miles felt bishop a4 would have been a simple option, and after b3 he could play bishop b5. And if queen c5 he would have played bishop to c3. And if captures he would have captured e takes d5, knight takes d5, and after bishop takes he finishes up with rook d8, which would pick up either the bishop or the knight on d2. But he didn't play bishop to a4, he felt like he had a stronger move, which he played d4, hitting the queen. And this is because after queen h3, he can play d3 to protect the bishop on c2. Very nice. White finally castled, and Black played a protective move, just king g8, protecting the pawn on h7. And this bishop now eyes up this b2 pawn, which will be very deadly for White. So White plays e5, trying to gain some counterplay, unleashing this bishop to attack the c6 knight. Black played rook to d8, protecting the e6 pawn. And of course, if White takes on c6 here, Black can simply play queen c5 check and pick up the bishop afterwards. So it is a very valuable option, but actually in the game, e6 was played by White, just giving up this e-pawn because it's already lost anyway. F takes e6 was played, and now rook to e1. Miles played knight to d4, maybe preparing knight to e2 ideas, or knight to f5 to secure their defences. White played king h1 and Miles played knight to f5. Again, this bishop on g7 is eyeing up this b2 pawn, which would be very deadly for White. White played rook e4, trying to gain some counterplay, but Miles played queen to g5, hitting the knight on d2. The knight jumps in to f3, hitting the queen, and now Miles just drops his queen back to h6. White goes in for the counterplay, rook h4, and in this position Miles admitted that knight h4 would have been the better move. And after queen takes e6, Black has defences with king h8. White can try queen to e7, but rook f8, knight g5, rook takes f1, bishop takes f1 and bishop f8 is just fine for Black. He said Black can defend this way, but he preferred the simpler approach. So after rook h4 he actually played queen to e3, a simpler move. This is because rook h7 just leads to Black to play d2, and there's no way for White to attack Black anymore. White will be forced to capture, and after queen takes d2, Black's just in a one position. So after queen e3, White took on b4, and Black played d2 anyway. Knight takes d2 was played, queen takes h3, bishop takes h3, and now rook takes d2. And all of a sudden we're in an endgame where Black's in a better position with two pieces for the rook. White played rook e1 to hit the pawn on e6. Bishop f8 was played by Miles to hit the rook on b4. Rook b8, king f7 to protect the pawn on e6. Rook to b7 and bishop to e7 to block. So Black's got a very solid structure, and it's just a matter of technique until black wins this game, to be honest. Bishop f1 to hit the pawn on a6, but now bishop to a4, preparing moves like bishop c6 check, trying to win this rook and check the king at the same time. Rook b6 was played, and now bishop to d6, preparing moves like rook takes h2. White plays rook e2, black plays rook d1, hitting the bishop. So Miles is just constantly causing threats against white's position, and white's having to defend immensely here. King g2 defends the bishop, but now bishop to b5, hitting the rook on e2 and protecting the a6 pawn at the same time. After rook f2 was played by white, the game was actually adjourned, and this is where Miles actually said that the capacity crowd of 1,000 people actually stood and applauded his game. So that must have been an amazing feeling. He said the rest of the game was actually a minor affair because it was played back in a hotel room. But after rook to f2, black played bishop c5, hitting both rooks at the same time. So white plays rook to b7 check. After king f6, bishop takes b5 was played and a takes b5. White played rook e2, and Miles played rook to g1. So all of a sudden white's in a lot of trouble. If king to f3, black can play knight to d4 check, forking the rook and king, so this can't happen. So he played king h3, and after g5, they're preparing moves like g4, an immense threat against white's position because it leads to mate. So white plays rook to g2 to stop this, but after rook d1, white actually resigned in this position. This is just due to the fact that now black is threatening rook d3 check, and will pick up the rook if it plays rook to g3. g4 is also a big threat against white's king. For instance, play could continue rook takes h7, but after rook d3, rook g3, black's just going to take the rook. After a takes the rook, just play a move like bishop to d6, and this should be a simple clean-up operation for a player of Miles' standard. And with this victory, Miles actually won the event with a round to spare, because the other leaders lost on the other boards. But this was a genius game by Miles, and particularly this a6 move was what seems to have won it for black in this position. I wonder how many of us would have actually played that move. So let's just have a look at it again. After a6, the bishop takes the rook, and after king takes, all of a sudden white's got to defend their position. The knight's attacked, and after e takes d5, e takes d5, white's got a few decisions to make. I should just say briefly, if white played knight to d4 here, this still loses to knight takes d4, queen takes d4 and queen to e7 check. Even if bishop to e2, again black can just play moves like knight takes g4, and all of a sudden this bishop is just unleashed against white's position. So in the game, knight to a3 and b5, as we saw previously, Miles just now started attacking white's position, and all of a sudden white was forced to move their knights to the back rank and was just annihilated by black's dynamic piece play. So an absolutely genius game from the first British Grandmaster. I hope you enjoyed my analysis of this video. Please drop me a like, comment or subscribe to the channel if you want to watch more chess videos in the future. Please also give me some recommendations as to what you'd like to see in future videos. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.